Scientific thinking is, at its best, self-correcting. A framework that served well in earlier stages of a research program gets revised when new observations demand it, not abandoned entirely, but updated, deepened, and made more adequate to what has been learned. In 1923, Sigmund Freud performed exactly this kind of revision on his own fundamental model of the mind. In The Ego and the ID, he replaced the topographical model, conscious, preconscious, unconscious, with the structural model, ID, ego, and superego. It was one of the most significant theoretical moves in the history of psychoanalysis. What forced the revision? Primarily, a recognition that had been building through years of clinical observation. The topographical model didn't adequately account for the full complexity of psychological conflict. The original model had proposed that the unconscious was the source of repressed wishes, and the conscious-preconscious system was the site of the repression function. The sensor, the mechanism that kept unconscious material from becoming conscious, was located on the conscious side of the divide. But Freud increasingly observed that this assignment didn't hold up. Repression was itself an unconscious process. Patients showed no awareness of the act of repressing, just as they showed no awareness of the repressed content itself. The ego, which was supposed to be the essentially conscious agency, clearly had large unconscious components. Its defensive operations happened outside awareness, its regulatory functions operated below the threshold of consciousness, and its characteristic patterns of resistance in therapy were themselves unconscious. The clean geography of the topographical model had become untenable. The structural model solved this problem by organizing the mind not according to its relationship to consciousness, but according to the distinct functions and goals of its component agencies. The ID is the completely unconscious reservoir of instinctual drives and primary process functioning. It seeks immediate discharge, knows no logic or morality, and is the oldest part of the personality developmentally. The ego develops from the ID, inherits its energy but deploys it in a reality-oriented, reality-testing way, and mediates between the id's demands, the superego's prohibitions, and the external world's constraints. The superego develops from the ego through identification with parental figures and internalizes the moral and ideal standards of the cultural environment. Crucially, all three agencies have both conscious and unconscious aspects, meaning the structural model doesn't map cleanly onto the topographical one. The ego's rational, reality-testing functions are conscious or preconscious, but the ego's defensive operations, repression, projection, rationalization, displacement, are largely unconscious. Similarly, the superego's guilt responses are felt consciously, but much of the superego's operation is unconscious. People feel vague anxiety or self-criticism without being able to articulate what moral standard they believe they violated. The structural model also provided a more satisfying account of what Freud called structural conflict, the conflict not between the unconscious and the conscious, but between different agencies with different goals within the same personality. The ID wants immediate sexual gratification. The superego prohibits this as immoral. The ego is caught between them, trying to find a path that satisfies enough of both while remaining viable in the real world. This three-way conflict generates the anxiety, guilt, and symptom formation that psychoanalysis addresses. The structural model became the foundation for all subsequent psychoanalytic development. Ego psychology, the major North American school of psychoanalysis that dominated the mid-20th century, built directly on the structural model, exploring the ego's adaptive capacities, its defensive repertoire, and its developmental history. Anna Freud's systematic elaboration of defense mechanisms in the ego and the mechanisms of defense extended her father's structural model in crucial directions. Object relations theory, self-psychology, and modern relational psychoanalysis all engage with and partly depart from the structural model's framework. Whatever revisions subsequent theorists have made, they have been revisions of a structure that Freud provided in 1923, and that still forms the backbone of most psychoanalytic clinical thinking. Subscribe to Psychology. Theories explained for more psychology breakdowns every week.